earlier this afternoon, former President Trump held a press conference and he fielded questions from reporters. So that's something that we've already been talking about, is something that Vice President Kamala Harris has not done since she replaced President Biden as the Democratic nominee for U.S. president. So what can we draw from all of this? What can we draw from the fact that we see Trump out there answering questions, but we're not seeing Kamala Harris? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Glenn Grothman. He serves on 3 different House committees, one of which is the Oversight Committee, which, by the way, he and I sat side by side on the Oversight Committee for a long, long time. He represents the 6th Congressional District of Wisconsin. Congressman Grothman, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to see you, my friend.
I'm so fortunate to be interviewed by Jody Heiss.
Hey, listen, that goes the opposite direction. All right, Congressman, let's start with this. Former President Trump, he covered a lot of ground today with reporters at his press conference. Isn't that the way it's supposed to be with any candidate who's seeking the highest office in the land, that they go before the media and inform the people of who they are and what they believe? Shouldn't we be seeing this from Kamala Harris?
You think so? For those of us old enough to remember going back to Richard Nixon, the supposedly liberal press was always asking for more press conferences. We need more press conferences. We need more press conferences. Joe Biden 4 years ago addressed a minimal number of press conferences. It took 3.5 years to find out why that is, and that he had beginning dementia, and they were afraid to put him before the press. Okay, so now we're in the same situation here with Kamala, and one more time the press, which is usually leading the charge, we need press conferences, we're going to judge the president by how many press conferences they have, is relatively mute on the fact that Kamala Harris doesn't want to meet with the press. Now, there are a variety of theories for that. Maybe she's a very poll-driven person without any concrete opinion on issues, and she's yet to decide where she stands on the issues. Maybe her handlers are afraid of what she'll do if she's unleashed. But for whatever reason, she is not going out and taking interviews. And the press that normally would crucify a candidate for saying, I'm not having press conferences, doesn't deal with the issue.
Yeah, well, frankly, they did the same thing with President Biden while he was asleep or whatever he was doing in the basement of his home during so much of the time. And we're seeing a repeat of it. But this is getting a bit ridiculous 18 days now after a historic change of events from President Biden to her as the Democratic nominee. It's head scratching, to say the least. Let me ask you this. The press conference that President Trump had today, were there any takeaways that you took from that? Anything that the American public should take away from that press conference?
Well, just one more time, emphasizing the huge difference on issues between the two of them. You're never going to have, that I can think in my time, even last time where you had Trump against Biden, you're never going to have an election in which the difference between the two candidates is more stark. And, you start with the border, maybe 7 million people coming here during the first 3.5 years of the Biden administration. President Trump, he had about 5,000 people a month. So you're going up by a factor of about 10. You have the huge difference in, I think, what you're going to see as far as level of spending. 3 big bills that were, totaling over an additional $3 trillion passing under the Biden administration, obviously leading to inflation. That's a huge problem. You have the energy situation, which is fanning the flames on inflation. President Trump, let's drill some more, let's produce more oil in this country, which also would reduce the amount of money that we're sending to Iran, to Russia. Kamala, presumably following in the footsteps of Joe Biden, we don't want to produce this stuff here. So, any way you look at it, just huge differences between the two parties. And like I said, I would lead with immigration on that. The racial divide, big time Kamala Harris judging people by race, thinking that how you think is determined by where your great grandparents come from. I think President Trump is more upfront with people, just judging people by who you are. So that's another way you've got, I think, a big difference between the candidates.
Well, certainly, I agree with you. Certainly a huge contrast being made between the two parties, but also in the mix of all of this is also a contrast being made between the vice presidential candidates as well. You're from Wisconsin, not too terribly far removed from Minnesota for sure. What's your assessment,
I'll
Minnesota
tell you
governor?
something. I'll tell you something that we thought on the difference between the two candidates here. You know, normally Wisconsin is a much closer state than Minnesota. Minnesota is a more Democrat state. But when you saw the polling data maybe 3 or 4 months ago, it was actually Wisconsin and Minnesota were relatively close. We wonder why that is. And the conventional wisdom among the political class is the reason, relatively speaking, President Trump is doing better in Minnesota than Wisconsin is because Governor Walz was so liberal. This is before anybody thought he'd be a vice president. Was so left wing that the things he did in Minnesota have poisoned the Democrat Party for Minnesota voters. So if you would ask me, what do I think about the governor of Minnesota a month ago, I would have said, well, he's hurting the whole Democrat Party in Minnesota because he's so wacky, so out there on the issues, some of which you've covered. I never would have dreamed 2 months ago this guy who we believe is hurting the Democrat brand in Minnesota is going to be named the vice president of the United States. But that looks like where we are. Now, I hope the Republicans haven't told everybody how bad Walz is prematurely. And because I think if I were the Democrats, I'd be looking to swap him out for somebody else.
That's an interesting thought. That would be yet another historic event if that were to take place. But the pressure that's coming on, and the more and more that's being revealed about him, I wouldn't put that out of the equation at all. All right, listen, our time is beginning to run out. I wanted to get to something else. Of course, House Republicans have, or everyone's in recess right now, but House Republicans have been very active sounding the alarm on the southern border. The Judiciary Committee released a couple of reports on this. Of course, the committee that you serve on, likewise, the Oversight Committee is doing some tremendous work on the border and demanding some answers. The documents, the communications from the Custom and Border Protection, what are you hoping is going to come from all of this?
Well, I think we have to further educate the American public on the cost of illegal immigration, both the cost as far as the dollar cost, more welfare, more education, but as well the cost in crime, people getting killed, that sort of thing. The human costs, even of the people coming here, the huge number of people drown in the Rio Grande, drown in the Pacific Ocean, die, dehydrate in the Arizona heat. So we want to one more time tell the American public, look, this is what you're voting for if Kamala Harris gets back in there as president of the United States. And there's no question this is the way it's going to be. The American public should have figured this out 4 years ago when Joe Biden raised his hand and said he was going to give free health care to all the immigrants. So it shouldn't have come as a surprise. But I still find when I talk to people around Wisconsin, it surprises them. Why do we have a president of the United States that doesn't care at all about our immigration laws? You're going to get that in spades if Kamala Harris, right? I mean, she is Miss Open Borders.
Thank you, Congressman Glenn Grothman. Great to see you again. Thank you for joining us on Washington Watch. Always an honor.